Brexit is a challenge, we all know that. It's also multifaceted. And I think that's really important because it raises lots of questions, and to be able to give a measured and methodical response and some thought to those questions, there's all sorts of things to consider. So there's legal, regulatory, political issues, policy insight, supply chain issues. And it's against that backdrop that we have been collaborating with BCG and Global Counsel to enable us to advise clients and other interested parties on what Brexit may mean and to help devise strategies to address it.
What we take a hard Brexit to mean is exit from both the EU and the EEA and probably the EU Customs Union, reversion to third country status, trade with the EU, broadly speaking, on the same basis as any other third country in the WTO universe. That is very definitely the hardest of hard Brexits. And the reason that we adopt that approach is essentially methodological. It's essentially an analytical tool, because our contention and assumption is that the best way really to map this process for your business, the best way to understand it in your own mind, is essentially to understand how bad it can get. And once you've understood how bad it can get, then you can start to get imaginative about what structural solutions for your business might help mitigate some of the impact. And crucially, for this panel in this room, what the policy toolkit looks like.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you the journalist question, which we always get asked when we're trying to pitch a story. So what? Why does it matter?
The so what is big decisions that you make today, commitments to investment, can have very, very far-reaching consequences. The case studies that we exhibited in the report show it. There's a lot at stake. Not to mention, because this is purely the trade aspect, but not to mention that today the strongest impact is the depreciation of the pound against other global currencies. And so in this environment, it matters to understand what the impact is. There's instability elsewhere. The election in the United States has delivered an additional degree of uncertainty on some of these questions. And so, to an extent, it's adapting to a new normal where there's less certainty, and so reverting to decisions that offer more optionality.
Let's talk about tariffs for a little bit.
I've been working with someone who wanted to move a warehouse from Italy to the UK. What they were selling was textiles imported from the Far East. Now, you could organize that in such a manner that it still goes into the EU at the tariff rate imposed for the Far East, and you could avoid having double duty. So you could avoid paying duty first in the UK and then in the EU if you use something called a bonded warehouse.
And Pierre, it's not just about tariffs, though. It's not just about the taxes on goods. It's often about the administration, particularly in integrated supply chains where there's very low margins and it's all about getting things just in time.
Yes, so inevitably when you create a barrier or a border, that comes with friction. It comes with medium-term friction around protection of IP, potential exposure to different regulations, and so needing to comply with regulations that are likely to grow further apart with time, but also on a transactional basis, just more simply put, more paperwork, and therefore a hindrance to fluidity of the movement of goods. So it will create inevitable friction, yes.
If I had to pick an infrastructure challenge that the UK has at the moment, I wouldn't be looking at Heathrow or HS2. I would be saying we have a real problem, that we have a computer system that at the border that's going to have to double the amount of traffic it has to process. The mutual interest in essentially trying to maintain as much of the current status quo in tariff-free goods trade is extremely strong.
Now, one of the things that Loda, you could help us with is about the legal implications for companies.
I help companies and clients quite a lot, both with regulatory barriers within the EU and outside. Right? I can assure you it is an enormous difference. Right? Within the EU, you can go to a national court and challenge the trade barrier there. You can ask the Commission to help you. All that actually works quite well. Outside the EU, if you have to go to the WTO, for instance, it is a completely different world. The main problem that you have is that it is the dispute settlement system is only state to state, which means you have to find a state to fight your battle in the WTO, which is not always simple. And which brings with it all sorts of political complications. Just to give you, it's an imperfect comparison completely, but there are in the WTO about 10 dispute settlement cases per year. That's for the entire world. Right? In the ECJ, European courts, you get, I think, at least 1,500 cases per year.
What about the opportunities?
Like any change in the competitive landscape, there will be companies that are better and worse positioned to exploit change. It's probably mostly at the level of individual companies. Now, of course, there'll be companies that will be hurt for every company that, that benefits from that. But I think that is at the level of an individual company, inevitably, everybody's going to be thinking, how are we positioned for these, to take advantage of these changes? So I think that's probably the most fruitful way to think about the opportunity.